Hannu was like very private, so he loved being in the States, where like literally he could drive an Audi to the dealership and they would try to explain to him how quattro works and like what was wrong with the car, and they didn't realize like on the wall was a picture of him jumping in the rally car.
All right, so normally I'll do like the roll in, right, where we say the person's name at least at the very beginning, but this time around with recording it, I kind of skipped it. I had a conversation with Juha and Vesa Mikkola, who are the sons of Hannu Mikkola, and I was a little starstruck, right, just in the opportunity to speak with Hannu's two sons about his amazing career. So I just kind of jumped right in excitement. So pardon the screw up on my end, which with that, we'll jump right into the conversation and hope you enjoy it. Hi.
I like the background there.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I can't see it, and if I move my computer around, I probably mess up my whole setup here. But I have like different rally shots around the office. It's
nice. That's super cool. Yeah, that's great. What
good afternoon.
Is that an RS6?
Sorry, that's basically it's a US spec tribute.
Oh, nice.
So
wait,
I think GT Spirit makes it, and then the Black Sport Quattro, I think what Roll and what PX both had one.
Nice.
I think they're the only two to get black ones.
Yeah, that's cool. I had a Nardo RS6, but I just sold it, unfortunately. So
Did you?
Yeah, maybe get it back, but the market's so crazy, that it's like,
right.
I drove it for a year and a half and basically it was free. So I'm like, okay, might be a good time to move into something a bit cheaper.
Yeah. I last year I picked up actually that car. I found the used one from just 5,000 miles on it from
nice.
the dealer in Westlake, California, and the owner had traded it to a Land Rover dealer there, and I guess they got a Range Rover or something, and the Land Rover dealer didn't know what it was. They just thought it was RS6. So I was able to buy it at normal money, and
nice.
I'm still driving it, but I think you're probably smart to maybe I'm very aware of that at some point depreciation will hurt me.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And the more expensive car it is, the more it's going to hit you, so I'm like, okay, might be the right time to exit. And I have a friend who's a dealer, so I traded it in to him, and he ended up having to sell it at a loss at auction, and I felt super bad because the market was so hot, and then it just changed in a matter of weeks, and he's like, now it's very different out there. You can start getting cars for, I guess, not depreciated money yet, but at least like without paying crazy surcharges on top of it.
Yeah, and I think there was so much pent up demand for that car too in the US that what was it, 2,000 a year that they were bringing to the US anyway. So it's not as a rare car as I think people initially perceived.
Yeah, I look on. I mean, when the shortages happened, okay, but I look on Auto Trader now, and there are plenty of inventory, some Audi exclusive ones. I know the other thing I worry about, just being still in one and concerned about depreciation. We know the facelift is coming next year, and then that'll be mild. But then you've got the RS6 Performance, and I'm debating it, like how long is too long to hold on to this thing. But I love it, so it's hard to get rid of.
It is a cool car for sure, and I mean the design is so awesome. It's just like one of the best looking cars I think ever made. So definitely isn't a bad daily driver to keep around.
No, not at all.
Are you in California or where are you?
I'm actually in Pennsylvania.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So grew up here in Pennsylvania, and I moved to DC for part of my adult life. Then we had kids. We moved back here near the parents, and so Hershey is the town, where they make the chocolate and whatever. Right?
Yeah, you guys have a minor league hockey team, right? The Hershey
we
Bears.
do, yeah. Hershey Bears, pretty historic team, I think, in that league. But
totally. Yeah, I used to work a lot in hockey, and my wife worked at the National Hockey League actually. So
really?
It's like know all the minor league teams a little bit too.
Yeah.
And Hershey's the one that does the teddy bear drop, right, for charity.
Totally.
Yeah, I know that one.
Yeah, it's great. That's a great tradition they do too, and it's neat. And for a small town, I'm literally like, the hockey stadium is maybe, I don't know, 300-400 yards that way. So it's cool. It's nice and close.
Nice.
Yeah. So you guys, are you in Florida, or are you? That's one thing I didn't check ahead of time, but I know your father was living in Florida.
Yeah. So Hannu had a place in He got his place in Palm Beach in '79, partially because his parents were looking for a place to retire. And I think originally, that's like, and maybe correct me if I'm wrong, but it was originally he was looking at a place in Spain, and then they ended up, a lot of his parents' friends ended up in Florida. There was like this big influx of Finns like moving into the Palm Beach area, and he just fell in love with it. He thought it was amazing, and he got a condo there. And we actually spent a lot of our younger years there. So kindergarten to fourth grade, we lived in Florida, and then ended up moving back to Finland as a family, but always kept the place. And then about 8 years ago, I moved down here to start my previous business, which was a coding school, so teaching computer programming. And I'm in Miami, so I'm about an hour from where my mom has the place now, but definitely a lot of roots to Florida. And it's great to be back, because as a kid, really felt like home, and it's great to be here. And a good moment.
Yeah.
Miami's been like growing like crazy.
Yeah, I'm located in Toronto, so I'm actually north of the border. But the story with the condo in Florida is actually, it was a stop also for our parents' honeymoon in '79. So they did a trip around the world, and they did stops according to Hannu's rally schedule. So basically he was driving all across the world, and they did all these stops. And the condo that they still, or my mom still has the apartment in, was originally developed by a Finnish person. So they had kind of connections, and through mutual friends knew of the condo. So they had a stop there, and yeah, fell in love with it. And so our grandparents on Hannu's side retired there, and then our parents as well got a place there. And I feel like they've been probably on every floor of that condo in different apartments since.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and what Hannu was like very private, so he loved being in the States, where like literally he could drive an Audi to the dealership, and they would try to explain to him how quattro works and like what was wrong with the car, and they didn't realize like on the wall was a picture of him jumping in the rally car, and he would never correct them, and then he said one time somebody figured it out, and then he went back like the next day wearing a hat, and the guy was like, "Oh, you're from Finland. Like, do you know that Hannu Mikkola was here yesterday?" And he was like, "Well, that's actually me," but there's a rumor going around that this guy had been at the dealership, but he really liked the privacy, like when he was driving, obviously people recognized him, and then here he could kind of do his own thing, which I think he appreciated a lot.
I was at the 12 Hours of Sebring once, and in the paddock they were doing the autograph session, and I was standing behind and photographing Tom Christensen, Alan McNish, and Dindo Capello, that driver team. And your dad just sort of like, he was waiting in line very unassumingly for an autograph, and he walked up to McNish and he's like, "Can I get your autograph?" And I don't know if Alan knew him ahead of time or not, but Alan certainly very, very quickly recognized him, and he goes, "How about I get yours?" Right, like that would be great. So it was
that sounds like him.
Yeah, he just kind of snuck in a very stealth way.
That's a great story. Yeah, we had Race of Champions here in Miami. I forget how many years ago. Maybe it's like 4 or 5 years ago, but I had to convince Hannu to come down and drive and be part of it, because I was like, it's in my hometown. We got to go see it, and then we were walking in, and I remember Vettel was walking in at the same time. I'm like, "Wow, that's Seb. We need to talk to him." And then my dad's like, "Fine, okay." And Seb said the same thing. He's like, "No, I want a picture with you. Like, here's a real race car driver. Like, can we do some pictures?" I was like, "This is cool." Like such an awesome moment, but very unassuming. He liked to kind of blend in and not stand out too much.
That's very cool. So that shot, that there's this one, I'm assuming then, the shot you referenced when he was at the dealership, I think it was the one I see Audi of America use all the time. It's this one shot. I think, that's the one car kind of in midair, and
and it's kind of like dusty or foggy in the background, and there's some debate actually to which rally it was taken in, and I think Audi corporately said it might have been Portugal or somewhere like that where it was taken, and then my dad was convinced it was in Finland, but I don't think they ever kind of found out exactly who the photographer was or where it was taken. And even when in some of the marketing, I actually worked for Audi Canada years ago, and most recently at Volkswagen Canada, but I remember seeing it in our like marketing database, and there was a version where they had actually photoshopped it so the car was much higher in the air. so they used it for all kinds of uses, I know, in the marketing world.
I swear I've seen it in so many things at this point, but I've always wondered tho, like, which rally is it at and who is driving it. So
it's definitely Hannu, and I think the only debate is which rally it was. I want to say it was Audi Germany was saying it was Portugal, and then I remember talking to Hannu about it once, and then he said it was Finland. But and he could even say like what junction, it was kind of over a junction area, and there was a little jump, so he was convinced he knew exactly the spot for it.
Well, it would seem consistent with that. From everything I've heard of that rally, it would seem with topography he'd be interacting with it or driving
Yeah,
through it.
yeah, and I mean, I drove rally for about 7 years before I relocated to Canada. So I stayed in Finland for all my studies and kind of drove at the same time and got to do it at a fairly high level, but never, at the level that Hannu did. But I remember I drove Rally Finland once. I think it was 2004, and we did some, maybe not so official, recce of the stages, and I was just completely blown away with his. First of all, his eye for the road, kind of anticipating where it goes, but then also his memory. Like he remembered all of the stages, and I mean, Rally Finland or Thousand Lakes Rally back in the day, it used to go all over Finland. It would start in like Lahti, which is 100 kilometers north of Helsinki, and then go all the way up to far north of Jyväskylä. And it was really a tour of Finland. So, I mean, he would know all the roads everywhere. And Olympia, especially, which is a really, really famous rally stage. I got to drive that. And I mean, this was like 30 years later, and he remembered exactly where the stages go. It was fantastic.
I mean, that era of rallying is just so, I even today, rallying is it's such a different level from an endurance standpoint. But I look back in particular at that time, the cars are still so raw. The roads are still relatively open, and what they were, where they went was very different than today with liability laws and everything else.
And then also the machinery, right? Like the distances, and they drove mostly during the night, and then the machinery too. I mean, back then, if you were lucky to finish half your rallies, like that was good. Your car would break down, and especially Audi first coming into, the World Championship, not only was it 4-wheel drive, it was kind of bringing back turbocharging. It was the first real big team to have turbos in the cars. They had a new tire, they had new suspension, so everything that could, potentially break usually broke, and they had a kind of steep learning curve, at least, in those first couple of years for sure.
I think your dad was one of the first people. There was Freddie Kotolinsky and a couple people involved very early, but I think your dad was one of the first drivers they contacted to come in and kind of test it. Did he ever talk about that period and kind of, I guess how, Audi looks very buttoned up by the time they're fully in it and whatever else, but I have to imagine those early days was a very different team.
Yeah. The way that he described it to us at a time was he also signed a contract 1 year before he actually drove for them. So, he signed basically like an open contract where he still was able to drive some, World Championship rallies in a Ford Escort and Mercedes at the time, as crazy it was, the 450 SLC, 4-speed automatic, the big tank. So he was still driving those cars, but then he was also, testing and developing the Quattro. And I mean, what's hard to believe now was that 4-wheel drive back then was considered for Jeeps. It was literally like for Army, utility vehicles, and it was unheard of that you could actually race with 4-wheel drive. And I remember him saying the first time, he drove the Quattro, it was basically like a 50-50 drive split, and the thing would understeer crazy, and you could just not, get it to turn. So I don't know if this is well known or not, but in the beginning, at least the 81 Quattro, they had an open diff in the front. So it was essentially 3-wheel drive car. It wasn't even 4-wheel drive until they got kind of the diff sorted and stuff like that, because it was just so undrivable. But I mean, I don't think what was probably very appreciated, with his move at the time was that it was a huge risk. Like it could have went bust, and there was nothing that was kind of guaranteeing that it was going to succeed. So he took a really big risk. And I think over time, was convinced that the format and the formulas was going to work. And he was the first guy essentially who signed on. I think Harold de Muth was also doing some testing at the time, but he was really the first guy in. And then, when Audi left rally, he was the last guy out too. So it's really cool to have, dad's name linked to really the beginning, and then also, the last bit of rallying as well.
Yeah. And I think one thing that was probably really helpful for him in making the decision was he actually studied to be an engineer. So he knew a lot about how cars worked, mechanicals. Like it was definitely like his backup, like he was, I think it was structural engineering, if I remember right, what he ended up studying. Yeah, civil engineering. But he went through and finished that even when he pretty much had a path to like start driving. At the time, it wasn't super professional, when he was finishing, but he really enjoyed that. And in later in life, I remember like, he studied to be a helicopter pilot. He got a pro license and flew people around professionally. Like he was just always reading and studying and being really into kind of improving himself and using his mind. So I think that helped him when he was deciding like about this project, because like Vesa said, I mean, it was really like a military Jeep thing. And I think at the beginning, there's crazy stories when Audi went to like the FIA to try to get this approved, and be like, hey, can we drive with 4-wheel drive? And we're just kind of laughing, like, why would you even ask that? Like, sure you can if you want to be slow, and then you come back and you dominate, when the cars didn't break. So I think there was definitely a help there for him, in terms of his background to understand what the potential was. And like Vesa said, huge risk, but probably also being able to see that reward maybe more than some other drivers might have been able to see it.
Do you know, like, I'm curious that there's a period there right at the beginning, and I think your dad was probably just getting signed on, or maybe, but what was the Dakar, the ILTIS program, right? Like what was fascinating to me was when I looked at the timeline of it, I was trying to keep track of this, and it was like, they're literally like getting the FIA approval for the or quattro at the same time, within weeks or months, maybe most, within the same time they're running Dakar in the ILTIS and winning like this slow, ungainly thing, but winning with that technology, and it almost seemed like a bit of a, like the FIA didn't really understand what quattro or all-wheel drive would do to rally, because of course it reset this, the standard of what you needed to win. But do you know, was he around during that time with the Dakar program as well? That I mean, I know he didn't compete in it, but I'd be curious if he spent time in the ILTIS as well and saw the potential even in that.
That's a great question. I don't think so. He might have, been at some of those early tests where they had some of this stuff, side by side. But what I do recall is he signed on a year, like I think it was early 1980 or sometime there with Audi. So it was definitely very early, considering when they entered their first rally, and as we know, he drove that first zero car in the Algarve rally, which recently in this Germany rally trip we actually got to sit in at Audi Tradition, which was fantastic to see his name on that car and actually sit in it and see kind of how it all started, and also how standard that road car was comparing to some of the rally cars, especially of today, but even later when the S1 and those beasts were out. So yeah, he definitely signed on early and was there working and developing the car, and to Juha's point earlier about his kind of engineering mind and always trying to make things better. I think he played a huge role in developing that car. I remember even afterwards or during that time, he was almost the general contractor of the team, and always making sure everything was going on and being done right. Even during services, I've seen so many videos and he's checking that everything's being done right, because with a new team they had kind of a lot of ups and downs and some mishaps as well. So he was very, very involved. I would say much more than kind of a driver is these days.
Given his engineering background, do you think it was that sort of technical challenge, the fact that they were really kind of branching off into a direction nobody had seen yet in that space? Like, do you think that's one of the things that sort of coaxed him away from? He was already successful and and doing well in more conventional rally cars, but like you mentioned, it's a risk. I'd be curious if it was that kind of technological shift that may have drawn him in.
I'm sure it did. And I mean, the other thing was, like, he was really at the end of his career almost at that point, especially with like traditional driver ages now, like it was definitely a move that, he had to see potential to want to do that. And I know, like, as soon as like kind of he got to winning the world championship, like he really like started to reduce his schedule, at that point, because, I think he had already maybe thought about this project as something like, hey, this could be amazing, but technologically, I don't think anyone could have predicted how massive impact it would have on not just rallying, but I mean road cars today, right? Like, I don't think it'd be hard to think of anything, in my opinion, in racing, where you could point to something like a moment where the FI says it's okay to do that, that would have such a pivotal impact on the cars that you and I drive today, right? So I think that's a really cool thing to look back on, and obviously at the time, like, to say he knew it was going to end up like that, I don't think it's true, but I think he saw potential there to help build something and be part of a team and be a part of this kind of like opportunity for him later on to give back in his experience and maybe win some rallies, but it ended up being probably more successful than he could have ever imagined as well.
Yeah, and I think also what's interesting kind of that time was that the drivers' championship had only existed for a few years. He had lost by 1 point to Bjorn Waldegard in '79, and that was they were teammates at the time, and they had agreed to a certain schedule to race, and It just, one thing we've also heard, when we talk to people and fellow rally drivers and people of that era, they've all commented, what a great gentleman he was, and this example definitely is part of it, where they had agreed on a schedule with Bjorn before the year started, and he ended up losing the championship by 1 point in the escort, and would have had an opportunity to drive an extra rally and actually win the championship if he had wanted to. But he was such a gentleman that he and Bjorn had talked, and this is a schedule, we're going to stick to the schedule, and he actually didn't go to that last rally, which then allowed Bjorn to win the World Drivers' Championship the first time. But I think that's also had only existed for a few years, but Hannu had been rallying since the mid 60s, and he had won the London, Mexico, Cup Rally in 1970. He had won Safari in 72. He had basically won or had a chance of winning, all the big events, before there was a championship. So I think going to Audi and kind of signing on to that program was also, to Juha's point, a chance for him to get that championship that, hadn't existed, but would also, obviously be a great career achievement.
It's striking as you're saying that. One of the other things I was curious about bringing up today is Michelle Mouton. And a couple times I've spoken to her, one of the things she speaks so highly of your father, and in particular, learning the quattro. You touched on this earlier. Learning the quattro in those days, it was such a different car to drive, and to get it to go fast was definitely a rethink in driving. And she pays a lot of credit to your dad, at least the couple times I've spoken to her on the subject, is about how instrumental he was in kind of being very open and maybe teaching her skills that would cause her to be a stronger competitor against himself as well, even within the team. Yeah, sure, but at that time, you see some of the quotes that were said about her, et cetera, in the press. Like, it was definitely a kind of boys' club. That she was the only woman to this day, the only woman to have ever won a WRC round, and so it sounds like your dad was so selfless with her in teaching her that. It just seems very a strong juxtaposition to maybe how the time was, right? Like, both from a race car drivers are always very competitive, and then on top of that, a woman in this space at that time is very abnormal, and yet here he was being so giving and helpful in that way.
Yeah, I mean, I honestly think it's one of the things I'm the most proud of, like hearing stories like that. It's awesome. I think in some ways he was probably ahead of his time in terms of how he approached that situation, but I also think that's just how Hannu was. Like, he was very open. He didn't believe in trying to keep info from your teammate or even from your other competitors in order to try to win that way. He really felt that the best driver, whoever that driver would be, would win the race. And if it meant that somebody could get a big advantage or a little advantage from something he shared, he felt that should go the other way too, and people should share that information. And he knew the people, like, on the circuit with him, where he kind of felt that come back, and he also knew the people who he had to learn the hard way, that would tell him something, and he'd end up at a rally and find out that they lied about the tire that they tested, and on purpose put him on a slower tire in order to beat him. And those are things that even in his late days, like, he would remember. And he's like that. I was never that type of competitor. I always felt that the fastest driver is going to win. And I think in Michelle's case, like, Michelle came in as an exceptional talent, like, insane and just so raw and capable and really fast as a driver. And I don't think he saw Michelle as a female driver. I think he saw Michelle as a really amazing fast driver who could win the championship. And like any teammate, he supported her and helped her. And it's too bad she didn't get that championship. It was so close. And I think for motor racing as a whole, to have had a female world champion today would be so amazing in terms of motivating, like, the next generation to really get through. But what she did, I think, is exceptional, and just like a huge achievement for her personally, but just demonstrating that, like, there's no reason a woman can't win races, like, whatever series it is, it doesn't matter. And I think motor racing needs to remember that and do a lot more to support that and push that forward.
Yeah, and there's a great video clip. I think it's from maybe 82 or 83 Thousand Lakes Rally in Finland, where Hannu is on the radio with Michelle, and Michelle is having some issue with the car, and it's on fire. There's a small fire in the engine, and he's like talking her through the situation of what she should do, and then at one point he's just like, drive it in the lake, just drive in the lake. And it's a really funny clip that I'm sure you can find on YouTube even. But yeah, I think he did a great job of helping her out, but vice versa, I'm sure she pushed, Hannu to be better as well as a driver. And to Juha's earlier points, like he really did, believe in a fair playing field. He did unfortunately experience some of that, negative side of competition as well at times from teammates and others. But he always, was almost too fair, in the past.
That's admirable though, right? Being fair when you don't have to be, and when it doesn't benefit you directly, right? Like that's I think the best show of character. That's pretty awesome that he was that way.
Yeah, and that was like well beyond racing. I mean, he always believed in that and just like approached life as like everybody's totally equal, everything's super fair, and like, you're gonna basically live your life according to that. So he definitely didn't deviate from it in personal life either. And it was one of the biggest things about his character that I admired a lot.
Yeah, and I think at the time also there was I think a closer kind of link and a closer club, you may say, amongst the Finnish drivers. So Hannu was kind of the old guard. His main idol growing up was Timo Mäkinen and some of the early guys who were excellent escorts in some of the other cars. But then there was a whole generation that was 10 years younger than him that came through. Like Kankkunen, for instance. Tommi Mäkinen, Hannu helped him get a spot at Mazda, early on, and get a chance there. Even Ari Vatanen, got his first chance in the Finnish championship, by support from my dad. So there was a lot that he did also to help kind of other Finnish drivers and other drivers in general. And it's great to also hear those stories where it's almost a different generation, but he also raced against those guys, and he was always joking that, especially Toivonen or Henri Toivonen, who unfortunately passed away, he began driving against his father Pauli Toivonen, and finished driving against the son. So he was always joking, saying that I started driving against the dads, and now I'm still driving against the sons.
That's funny. Did he ever I'm curious, I most of the research, I apologize, in prepping for this conversation was about your dad or about the specific race, this revival of the Olympia rally. But how did this play out with you two? Did he encourage you guys to race or to spend time behind the wheel competitively, or what experiences did you have?
We'll take turns on this one, but I think like for me at least, and I think Vesa too, early on, I mean, it was the polar opposite. He was always like, don't do this. Like, I remember him telling me, like, get a real job. This is, I've seen not just the dangers, but I think the difficulty of making it, and I think one of his biggest things was seeing drivers who were really, really good, but just didn't have that like last little bit, and that extra gear. And then your life goes to just chasing that dream, and you never quite make it, and it's only really even today in rally, only the very top, who really make it a good career. So I think his thing was always like, get a real job. I remember that really clearly, but it started with getting a good education, and I think also the thing that he did give me that kind of motivates me as an entrepreneur today is like, he said, he's like, I was very lucky that I got to do what I love every day. So I never felt like I was working. And I knew, like, for me, that's not going to be racing, but it's going to be something. And for me, it was entrepreneurship and building companies and being able to do things that really feel like exciting and fun and challenging, rather than something that would maybe be a traditional 9 to 5. So definitely remember kind of his words and that direction, like every single day when I'm doing stuff. And I'm really happy for him that he got to do something that he loved so much, that he was able to go out there and not just be good at it, but really enjoy what he was doing.
Yeah, and he had such an extensive career. I mean, it spanned really 30 years. He did his last World Rally Championship event, properly at age 50, 1993, 1,000 Lakes for Toyota. So, he definitely had an amazing career. But yeah, fully agree. I mean, I actually owe it to our mom for the chance that I got to drive rally, where we had kind of a ski cabin in northern Finland, and our parents really liked to downhill ski, but it wasn't really kind of translating to interest in the boys or myself. So Hannu and I had been to a couple of Finnish championship rallies just to watch, and I was probably like 16 or something at the time, and expressed a bit of interest, like, hey, this is cool. So kind of in a ploy to get me up there to spend some time. He bought an old 79 Escort RS 2000, not the greatest shape, but rear wheel drive and kind of a nice starter car. And the downhill slopes were in front of a lake, which they obviously froze during the winter, and they had the Audi winter driving experience on there. So there was an ice track ready to go. And I would go there for a week, and he kind of just left me there. And I was putzing around in this Escort. And then, Hannu came back a week later and was like, who's this crazy guy going sideways in the Escort? And that'd been me just practicing. And after that, he was like, oh, wow, maybe, should give a shot and see where it goes. And, it was my mom who did that initial convincing that I could drive. And okay, it didn't become a career, but I still got to do it at a level that most people don't. I did Asia Pacific Championship with Suzuki for a bit, and UK, and then Finnish Championship. So I got to drive and experience a lot and see a little bit of the world. So definitely had an appreciation kind of for what it would look like, but also it was great kind of life education as well. I mean, I was in my early 20s, and the thing I've always liked about rallying is similar to kind of Hannu's persona in terms of always wanting to get incrementally better. Rallying really taught me that, hey, you're always trying to find that second or half a second, no matter what it is. And it's not circuit racing where you break at the 100 every single time. It's a little bit art, a little bit science. So you truly never know if you got it completely right. So you're always trying to incrementally and little by little get better. So that was an awesome kind of life school for me. And initially owe it to my mom, but then Hannu obviously was a super supporter, and he was at all the rallies, always watching me. And he was also joking that he was never nervous when he was driving, but then when I started driving, it was like a whole different level of nervousness and anxiety. So but he never pushed us in the beginning. It kind of came naturally, and very fortunate that I got a chance to try it out.
Yeah, and Vesa drove so well considering how late he started. Like you would think in our case, having Hannu as a dad, like we would have been go-karting at 4 or something, but to actually start at 16 is kind of crazy. Even today, even more so, but even when Vesa was starting. So he definitely made it far starting so late. And I had the chance also to co-drive with my dad. So I got to do actually with Vesa too, which was really cool, but I got a chance to do like, we did the one that I'll always remember is London, Sydney in a classic Escort. We were 32 days in the car together and did like 20 different countries and just got a chance to go across the world. And I was 19 at the time. So it was a great experience, and just to like be there and get to see like what he did as a career and realize like that skill, and capability, like he was already retired at that time, but it was awesome, like just a really cool experience. I'm happy to have had with him.
Yeah, and I got a chance much later on, and I think it was actually Hannu's last rally, but we got invited to the Lake Superior rally in an Escort. So we were kind of the zero car, and I jumped in as the co-driver. I couldn't read the notes worth anything. So into the first stage, I just threw it away and I said, like, look, I can't do this. But again, he was so good at all the blind rallies and reading the road. It was truly fantastic. I mean, a guy pushing 70, going so fast in an Escort. So that was really cool. And then also, in later years, we were fortunate enough to go to Goodwood Festival of Speed with him, and Audi Tradition has been, a great kind of supporter of him, and now recently us with the revival, Olympia revival as well. But one of my memories is jumping in on the hill at Goodwood in an Audi S1 and him just going as fast as he could and just experiencing that raw power and crazy speed of that car. It felt like you were in a rocket ship.
Did it really?
That car is a beast.
I'm curious if because you mentioned he was there until the end of development at Audi. That was one of the things Michelle said about when they went from the S1 to the S1E2. Like it was so like it was crazy, right? Like at that point she was like, I don't know that's just a little. Like when she did Pikes Peak, she chose to say, I think that she may have had an option in her last year to run an E2, and it was so knife's edge that she really wanted something that was a little bit more I was not so knife's edge, rather, to get through that. And of course she won. So good choice there. But it sounds like that final evolution of the car was really quite extreme.
Yeah, for sure. And there's the video I think Vesa talked about from Olympia, like when he's in that S1E2, and it's somebody repurposed it kind of for YouTube after he passed away, and it's a really cool video. And I just remember him talking about that and saying like how that was one of the only times he really felt like he was outside of the car, when he was like watching himself drive, because like the speed, the performance was just so high, that it was somehow this like out of body experience where he just like got the stage that, was the fastest stage, the one that he knew the best. They had I think the summer place was nearby, where he grew up. So like this was like a place where like, he knew he could go all out. And when he got to that level, it kind of like became this almost like spiritual, experience of him doing it. But definitely those cars were, in my opinion, like on the edge, and obviously it ended up crossing that edge, unfortunately, and kind of going back, but amazing, engineering feats. And I think still for me, my thinking of 80s rally is, that S1E2 is like the example of like how crazy it got, and having a chance to have ridden in, some of the originals and the replicas, like it's still like to this day, like, I mean, maybe an RS6 today can like match some of the performance figures, but the way it feels and the way that the weight of the car and just that nervousness of how the car feels, like even as a passenger, like it's incredible. Like I don't think they'll ever make something like that again.
Yeah. And then, I think with the E2 especially, I mean, that car, I think in competition trim was, under 1,000 kilos, anywhere from 500 to 600 horsepower, depending on how much, you want to pull out of the turbo, which was the other crazy thing too, was, you could basically adjust, the boost from stage to stage if you wanted to, and the only thing that you're kind of fighting against is reliability or potentially what it does to the engine or the turbocharger. But yeah, I mean, so light, I guess it was the closest that rallying will get to kind of a two-frame chassis, to be honest. Like you just have Kevlar bodywork on the outside. It really is not there to protect you. But I think, to Audi's credit as well, they wanted to keep that link to the road cars. So they kept with the front engine, format of the car. And, competition or competitiveness wise, obviously that put them at a back foot compared to Lancia and Peugeot. But from a safety perspective and kind of relevancy to the road car, they wanted to keep that link, which also made it safer for the drivers, and there's crazy rumors of, the Lancias and Peugeots where, the drivers were sitting on the fuel tanks and stuff like that. So if you had an accident, it was going to be really, really nasty. So, but performance wise, it's and also the turbo lag, that's something that we won't experience anymore, but it's literally you have nothing. And then all of a sudden it's like, boom. Literally you're in a rocket ship and you're taking off. It's such raw power.
Yeah, it's funny. I have an Audi 4000, right? Like an 80 Quattro B2, an early one. And I had a chance to drive. Audi of America has just a regular road sport Quattro that's in their collection, and had a chance to drive it. And I was, until that boost came on, I was like, oh yeah, this is nothing. It's just like the 4000, right? And then the boost hits. You're like, wow, that's very different. And timing that, I suppose that's the magic of the 3 foot.
And the 85, 1,000 likes rally, it was only Pohja, which is the most famous stage and probably the stage that he also knew the best. He had an off, like I think it was on the first stage of that rally where he hit the rear end and damaged the suspension, so he had lost a bunch of time, and he was really pissed going into the stage, and he was like, look, we're really gonna give it a shot now. And I remember him saying that, like, yeah, he felt outside of the car, but he also said due to the wings and everything like that, it was very hard to kind of understand where the limit of the car was. He was just like, you could push it, go faster and faster and faster, but then you're also getting more downforce. So, it's very hard to kind of understand where the limit was in terms of, what those wings could do. And yeah, and I think between the original, S1 and the E2, the big difference obviously was the short wheelbase. It made it super nervous, that car, and that one without the wings, or the prior version to the E2, was very, very hard to drive because it was always understeering until it oversteered and just was a nervous car to drive, apparently.
Yeah. What tell me about the both your relationship with Audi tradition and the Olympia revival. It sounds like a fascinating event.
It was really really amazing. Yeah, go ahead, Vesa.
Yeah, I was just going to mention Audi tradition. So obviously Hannu over the years has always had close ties to tradition, and I mean, I don't think you have to go very far into the past that there wasn't any sort of historic element to Audi. So that grew pretty rapidly, and Hanno was always up to represent Audi if given a call. And more recently, we know Timo Witz there, who's running the operations for Audi Tradition, and he's a great guy who's also a supporter. So he supported us at this Olympia rally, and who knows, maybe we'll have a chance to do some stuff in the future again. But they have 4 cars of Hanno's now. So after the Olympia rally, we did a quick visit and went to look at those cars, and it's just fantastic to kind of see the name on the side of the car and sit in the cockpit and have that experience.
Yeah, and how like original the cars were. Like I'll always remember the Safari winning car is there, like the taxi, they call it, the bigger Quattro. And like Timo was mentioning the tape around the number of how they tape the number is the original tape still, so like to be able to like sit in that car and feel that everything is like, they made a couple of small changes, but everything is so close to original. It's really, really amazing to get to do that. But this rally was incredible. So the revival was planned for quite a few years. I mean, it's 2,500 kilometers across Germany. So like the organizers and the team who put this together, like absolutely incredible to be able to redo this rally 50 years later. But kind of what this rally was known for was Valtteri kind of made his breakthrough in this rally originally, and with the celebration, it was really a chance for him to kind of go back and drive across Germany in a way of how it all started. But he wanted to also bring along as many of the original competitors as possible, and Hannu had raced in that rally. It ended quite early, like he had some troubles with the car, but he was still at the time one of the big names, who was part of the rally. So they had contacted him years ago to be like, hey, we're planning this thing, and he had said, if I'm alive, I'll be there, like count on it, and unfortunately he couldn't be there. But when that happened, Valtteri's team, especially Alois, who does a lot of the coordination for the rally, and for Valtteri, reached out and was like, would you guys be interested in doing it? Because just having the name there would be really cool, and it would be a great experience for you guys. And at the time, we didn't yet know that Audi Tradition would also be interested in getting involved. So we said probably, like with our schedules, and we have young kids and work and everything, like taking 3 days off is crazy. And this was 11 days. And I think Vesa and I right away said, yes, like we'll figure it out. Don't worry, we're in, and then we ended up committing to it. And then like Vesa mentioned, Timo is a huge supporter at Audi Tradition. So him and Alois had spoken and figured out a way for us to actually get an original Quattro for the whole trip. And this rally was so incredible. I mean, first of all, Germany is such a beautiful country. We got to do some of the original roads, some of the original stops, like this Plattling track, which Vesa will probably talk about, like this dirt racing track, which was so cool. But also the cars that were there. There were almost 300 classic rally cars, some originals, some replicas. But the parking lots alone were like insane. Like we just walk around and see different people and talk to them. And you would meet people had seen Dad drive, people who worked on his teams. We even had people come with photos that Hannu had autographed. One was of a rally that I had co-drove for Hannu, and Hannu had signed it. And I don't know how anyone had gotten a picture of this, because it was not a big rally. There was no reason, but it was a race that I had done with him and got to sign this picture. And it was just so cool to see all these fans and people who had impressions from way back, of watching rally, and who had become lifelong fans. So it was just a really, really cool experience, and loved it.
Yeah, it was really cool, and we can't thank Alois Drexler and obviously Audi Tradition and Timo enough. I think Alois did some great negotiating on our behalf with Audi Tradition to make it happen. And the car we got to drive was actually original practice car of Michel's, and it was a car that Valtteri had done the 2017 historic Monte Carlo with. So basically, competition car or near competition car, but they had put standard engine and standard suspension in it, so you could do the long distances. And obviously, with it being 2,500 kilometers, you can't take a historic museum car that with race spec engines and do that type of kilometers. So it was great to have this car to be able to do it. And obviously, it was non-competitive. It was like a time and speed distance type event, but there was a few close stages, and this Plattling basically was a motorcycle speedway track, like so big, dirt track, and it was pretty interesting because we kind of heard people talk about it. It was part of the original thing in '72, where there was huge crowds in the arena watching, and they would send a couple cars at the same time. And and literally for us, in this A1 Quattro, they threw us on the track and said, have fun, no helmets, nothing like that, and we're like, okay, we'll give it a shot. And luckily I still had some of the skills from my rallying days, and then we got to do a couple Scandinavian flicks and throw the car around. So that was definitely a highlight for me.
I saw your story on Dirtfish. Probably worth googling for if anybody's listening to this. But I think one of the shots is showing you drifting it a bit there.
Yeah, and it's not easy. I mean, that car in itself is not the easiest to drift. And I was joking with Timo that next time, if there is a next time, I'm going to need a little bit more power just to keep that slide going. So.
Yeah. Well, I think one of the other things you guys mentioned in that story was a closed portion through the woods where you had a chance to be, I guess you were chasing, if you will, Walter through that had to be both crazy and I'm curious how well you were able to chase him. I know that Walter Roll is obviously a legend, but that sounds like such an incredible experience.
The crazy thing was that I was driving at the time. That was not the plan, like Vesa's obviously the main driver and I'm the co-driver, but we didn't know what sections, everything was in German. We didn't know what sections were closed and what weren't. Sometimes we drove the non-closed sections as if they were closed and vice versa. But this was like a proper mountain stage. So they had actually closed it off. And when we got there, it was just like, okay, well, Vesa's like, I got to do the other ones, like just go for it and see what happens. And it was insane, like just such a cool experience. And it was basically just like one lane, like mountain road, and just trying to keep those guys in sight. And then there was a moment when Vesa was just like, listen, drive within your limits, like let them go, like don't even try. And I was like, okay, good. I needed to hear that. And I was like, okay, back off a little and make sure we don't bring the car back in a bunch of pieces. So it was,
but the reason was I was starting to get scared. So that's fun.
Yeah, exactly. So I was like, hey,
I'll tell you, that's to me, whenever I've spent time, I'm not the most track experience. I've got some track experience. I can hold my own, I suppose. But like, I always find I'm in the worst space when I'm behind somebody I'm trying to keep up with, right? Because I find myself doing things I'm not really prepared to do. And so, that's, I find that one of the diciest portion of being on a track is being behind somebody who's faster than you and trying to keep pace with them.
Yeah, and especially if you've never driven a rally car before and you're driving an Audi Tradition original car, probably not good idea to try, So it was good. We backed off, and I mean, obviously, Walter is still like crazy quick, and we're driving with a couple of the other original drivers too. So it was cool to just see even the lines they were taking and what they were doing. And I think another thing that was so cool about this rally was like the way they had put it. It went through little towns. Like we basically were on the highway maybe for a total of 1 hour, over 7 days. So it was all back roads, little towns, and every single town had a group of people who were gathered there to wave on the cars. And Walter would go first and we would kind of come after, and everywhere just crowds, people cheering, so excited, to see this rally in a way that it had come through 50 years ago. So it was just a really amazing experience and shows like the passion of the motorsports crowd in Germany, but also the following that Walter has. Like, the best I could describe it is like, I've always thought Schumacher is like the god in Germany, but he definitely has that following, and so generous with his time. Like everywhere he went, signed autographs, spoke to the fans, like really gave so much of himself to the fans. So it's no wonder that he's remained such a big star, in Germany.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, he really does have a cult status over there. It was fantastic to see every little town on the side of the road, huge groups, cheering Walter on. And I found it crazy to see how many cars he's actually signed autographs on. Like he would stop at all these villages and then see the parking lots. Like literally every car would have Walter's signature on it. It was crazy.
Yeah, especially brands he never drove for. It's like, oh, it's funny. Like a Volkswagen Beetle or something would still have his autograph on it.
Yeah. Well, I guess when you run into him, you can't really necessarily choose what you're driving at the moment, but you don't want to miss the opportunity. That's fantastic. Was he driving? Sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead.
I was just saying, was he driving an Audi that day too, or?
Yeah, he had a bunch of different cars that he was driving, and originally in '72 he was driving an Opel Kadett, so that was kind of the first car he was driving the rally. But there was definitely an Audi day when we went to Neckarsulm, the other main facility of Audi, and their Audi Tradition had done kind of a handoff where he was driving a white Sport Quattro road car that he brought it there, and they had just finished restoring his. I believe it was the '85 Portugal car, so it wasn't an E2 S1, but the short wheelbase S1, he drove that for the rest of the day, but they had made this kind of cool handing off ceremony right in front of the main Audi office building, and a whole bunch of fans, even employees from the building, had come down to watch. So that was definitely a very cool experience.
That was probably the coolest part of the convoy, was driving behind that car, and then in our Audi tradition car as well. And it just, people were going crazy, and it just looked good, and that car just sounds so crazy. It was really fun.
For sure.
Yeah. And then in this motocross or the speedway track also, he did drive somebody else's E2 replica, so it wasn't like an original car, but that was pretty cool to see. So I mean, it was on basically like slick kind of autocross tires, so not best suited for gravel, but just hearing that, hearing that go, and the power and the slides was pretty cool as well.
It's interesting, that era car. I can only imagine, you guys doing what you're doing on a rally with Volta, et cetera, in rally cars. But like, we had last year or earlier this year, Audi Club gave away an quattro in our sweepstakes that we do annually. And so we had this 20 valve, it's 85 car that's been swapped to a 20 valve that we gave away. But I got to drive it briefly to a couple of events, and it's funny just in traffic how many people here in the US, would recognize it and literally roll their windows down. Is it real? Is it real? Tell me more about it. I can only imagine the attention you all got driving across Germany in fully liveried rally spec cars. And of course with Volta.
Yeah, I think most people probably mistook us for Volta, and that's why they were excited. But but definitely in the quattro was cool. And I mean, when it came to like hour 9 or hour 10 in the car every day, we were just starting to get a little bit tired. It also was a quite strong fuel smell in the car too, so it was a little bit draining towards the end of it, and very hot days. But every once in a while we'd see a glimpse of the car kind of in a shop's glass or mirror, wow, that looks cool, and it would instantly give you some more energy to keep on going. So yeah, that car was fantastic. And it's really, the A1 and the A2 is what I kind of most strongly associate with Hannu as well. 83 was when he won the championship, and he really was kind of Mr. Quattro of the early days. So those cars I feel are really the ones that Hannu also was the most comfortable in.
I mean, you mentioned meeting fans of your father on the event, and of course the autograph moment. Were there any other particular moments that really stuck out to you of interacting with them, or is it more just how great it is, I guess, that they still come out, they still draw and come and find you?
I think one thing I was really surprised about was how many young fans there were. So there were a lot of people who had taken kind of the 80s generation quattros and modified them. A lot of people had lowered them, made them look like these engine bays looked like works of art, just super stunning cars. And they knew all about the quattro history. We're so excited. They would drive behind us when we drove through their town, and kind of follow along. And yes, there's those fans who actually remember it and were there. And then there's this whole generation that's kind of learned of it from YouTube or from Audi history. And I think that's really cool. And I think when you think about Audi as a car brand, this is something that only Audi has, and it's amazing to see Audi tradition really embracing that, because I think it's such a massive differentiator. So I think that was a big surprise for me, was to see how many young fans there were that were just super excited about this generation of car and this generation of rallying. And then it was really cool to also meet people who had actually worked on my dad's cars or on some of the teams. So that was really cool. And we could ask what was he like, and what kind of interactions did you have? And it was great for us because at some points it got pretty emotional when we were remembering him and driving. And there's a moment when we were crying in the car together and just remembering these times of how it must have been for him, and what he was going through, and all of the crazy things he had that worked out, and all the crazy disappointments and crashes and everything through his career, because we definitely knew him as a dad, but that was such a big part of him, as a person too. So it was really a special opportunity. And I think for Vesa and I, that was the main thing, was to get a chance. We rarely get a chance to hang out that long together, but also have a chance to talk about Hannu and how it's been for us, in the last couple of years since he passed. So definitely a really special time.
That's fantastic.
Yeah, it was fantastic. And obviously, most of, let's say, Hannu's fans are, Finland or the UK where he drove a lot. But it was great to see a lot of, fans who remembered, Hannu and his time at Audi, but also, driving the escorts in Germany. So I was, pleasantly surprised that there were a lot of people who really, had a strong association with, with memories of him driving. And, I mean, Christian Geisdorfer was there, Walter's longtime co-driver, but he was also Hannu's co-driver later on with Mazda for a little bit. So, he was sharing some great stories, and those were really kind of the key moments as well for me, was just, asking them what they remembered of Hannu, and kind of, telling some stories, and remembering him together. So that was great. And I mean, everyone again was saying, what a gentleman he was, and how much they enjoyed working with him, or just being with him during those times. So I think that was truly great to be a part of.
Do you get many opportunities like that? I mean, I think that's, for me, just covering I cover the Audi brand in particular, right? And I have most of my career, but I look back at that era, and it's very hard to it's not to get a personal nature of it, right? This is before the time of social media or digital stories about everything, right? When Audi was Le Mans, there was so many more photographs taken, so much more video shot, the Truth in 24 documentaries, etc. There's it's a much more media supported world today, but much like the cars, the era they drove is so less covered, and makes it that much more perhaps interesting to a lot of us today, right? But there's I know how much it is how valuable it is for me to piece stories like that together when I hear it, but I'd imagine it may be more so for you guys. You're on one hand, you have had your father there, and we're able to hear his stories from him, but being able to piece it now as you get together with these other people too, I'd imagine it's a fascinating experience, and also emotional. But
yeah, it's super cool. And I mean, one of the things that my mom kept a lot of is like newspaper articles, so we were going through those, like, I forget, maybe a year ago, and it's crazy, like, to see like how much was actually written back then. A lot of it is Finnish media stuff, but like, most of those things are gone. Like, there's no archive of them, no one, like, really, it's a newspaper that's not around anymore, and nobody kept it. So we would try to digitize some of that stuff, and Vesa actually did this. Like, there was a huge drawer just of photos that he had, like, thousands of pictures that people have given to him over the years, that he kept. So just kind of going through those and trying to understand, like, what's from where, and who are the people in the picture with him, and stuff. So it's really cool. And I think some of it's coming to light, like on Instagram, there's accounts that share this stuff and are kind of putting some of these pictures, that as they find from other photographers. And actually, Alois, who we mentioned, like, one of the people he had brought onto the rally was the son of one of the original photographers who had been there, and he is also a very famous photographer himself. But what he actually realized was he found in his father's collection, like, some unpublished pictures of Hannu at the original Olympia rally. So he was like, hey, we're going to do this calendar of, like, current photos from the rally with the old pictures, and do some of the unreleased photos. So it's cool that stuff still exists out there,
sure.
And we created an Instagram account together, which is Mikkola Rally, where we posted, like, a lot of stories and pictures about what we're doing. So we want to, like, release that picture there, so people can, like, find, like, hey, there's stuff that, like, none of us have seen that's still there, that can help kind of bring the story back to light in a way.
That's excellent. So it was that photo.
Yeah, and one.
But I'm curious, the photographer, was that photo Crowley with Audi Tradition, or I know?
No, not with Audi Tradition. No, another photographer. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think we're obviously immensely proud, of what he achieved, and he was part of really the golden era of rallying. But I think also it's kind of a interesting, / weird dynamic at times, because first of all, he was dad and father to us, and a really great one at that, right? And there's been countless times where he's been or was more than supportive, and really kind of steered us in the right direction and provided the right guidance when we were growing up. So I think that, in kind of retrospect, and even since he passed, has been kind of weird, because there's so much that people remember, or have memories of him that are kind of public, that aren't normal, like, family kind of memories and that type of stuff. So there's kind of I have two, let's say, levels of it. One is obviously what he did, in his career, which we're, immensely proud of, and always, super interested in hearing more. But then, what obviously I hold closer and dearer to my heart is, the family side of it, and what an awesome dad he was.
I'll tell you, if like the magazine, I don't know if it's maybe I just got lucky, but maybe it's relevant, so I'll suggest it to you. I also try and, like, finding resources of that era is very hard to do, and so I've started looking on, like, eBay and just setting up a search or whatever. I recently found, like, I think it was eBay France, I found some interesting stories, like literally somebody must have cut up a magazine and was like selling particular stories, but I found like some on Michelle, right? So like and some are haunting. One was like right after her father passed, she left obviously left the race and went and said goodbye to her dad, and then at his funeral, and so seeing that, I guess she must have been such a figure in France, right? Like of the paparazzi following her around, etc. Like it's such a crazy eye of that into that time, which is but anyway, it's not often that stuff pops up, but at this point I've set up a search, and so when I see it, I try and grab it because it's usually pretty reasonably priced, and finding it is kind of random at this point, and there's so few opportunities to see these little windows of what it was like for them at that time.
Interesting. You mentioned eBay. I actually work for eBay right now, or eBay Motors. So, so that's great. But
a little plug. But yeah, what I was gonna say is, I think what's like crazy is that in those days, like it's hard to think of now, but I mean, rally was at the level of Formula One in terms of popularity, especially in these European countries, like where you had rally drivers that were doing really well. So it's now obviously not the same, but I think from that perspective, it makes sense why like there was so much media at that time covering these drivers and what was going on. And like Vesa said, the World Championship was just created. There's all this, like, it really almost, what was really interesting about the articles that my mom had kept, some were like explaining like what the career of a race car driver is, because people didn't realize that like you could make a living driving cars, and then explaining like to someone in central Finland that, this guy who was born in Joensuu was like racing and rallying, from London to Mexico and winning, and what that meant, and that there could be a job and you were world famous in the places you're going to. So right now it's like, common knowledge, like, yeah, some people go down that career, but I think at the time it was just starting to develop into something you could do professionally. And I think the fan interest during especially the Group B area just peaked, and it was at such a high level that, everybody was under a lot of microscope from the press, and there were just huge crowds and people so interested in what was going on.
Yeah, and even the tabloid media, I mean, Juha would know because he was featured in it as a baby, but in '82 when Hannu won the 1,000 Lakes rally, he was literally, on the podium with the Audi Quattro, and Juha was 1 year old, and our mom, gave Juha to Hannu to hold, like, in the car when he was like literally stationary, wasn't moving anywhere, and just to kind of sit with him in his lap. And the Finnish tabloids wrote about like, oh, what a reckless father Hannu is for letting his small baby into a rally car and this type of stuff. So there's definitely that, even back then.
It was his Michael Jackson moment, right?
Yeah.
It's interesting, right? Like today, I don't really know the WRC. You mentioned that how popular it was at the time, right? I don't know that. I don't know. Maybe the paparazzi do chase around the WRC, but certainly not that it's relevant in the US because we don't have a round. And but it was at such a level at the time, and maybe so relatable, and the fact that it was going into these parts of these countries that we can't all live in Monaco, right? So exposure to people and the relatability of these cars that you see driving down the road. Rally was at this,
and the access to the drivers too. It wasn't a separate paddock with credentials and all kinds of stuff to get into, right? Like they would service by side of the road. You could literally be there camping or watching or whatever, and potentially even just go talk to the drivers. So the accessibility was totally at a different level, and the rally drivers at that time were kind of everyday heroes because they were driving cars that kind of looked like the ones that you drive at home, but then also you had access where you could kind of talk and actually engage with them too.
Are you mentioned some of these, I'm just Googling there, not Googling, but searching on Facebook. You mentioned some of these Facebook groups where they post some of these photos, right? Like there's, I know there's one that's like Audi Sport Heritage or something like that I'm on, where you see these, and like you said, a lot of the photos getting posted and like close-up shots of the drivers kind of doing things. I've seen a lot of your dad and Michelle and Walter, like or fans, right? They're just people who attended the race and happen to get access to them, walk up on them, or wherever they were. I don't know, it's just such an open cool thing, doesn't really happen today.
Yeah, and it's cool to stumble upon. There's a really good group that's some Finnish, diehard or long-term fans started. It's in Finnish, but they post, pictures of Hannu from, throughout his career. And, sometimes you see stuff that no one's ever seen before because it's from a personal, collection, or somebody snapped some shots, and obviously, Thousand Lakes Rally went by, lakes and gravel roads with a lot of summer cottages around the place. So, people would be basically watching from the porches of their sauna when the rally cars were going by. So you see definitely. So yeah, exactly. You definitely see some cool stuff pop up every once in a while.
It's funny too, just for that period. Like I a couple a while back, I also interviewed on here Peter Burtwhistle, who's the designer. He was young designer at Audi Sport at the time, or sorry, at Audi at the time, and he designed the Audi Sport Quattro. Is kind of one of his more known Audi designs before he leaves the brand. But he talked about in his spare time, they would hang out down at the old supermarket that was the Audi Sport facility, and like he would in his spare time paint the livery on the car. Like it was very, very, very. It was Audi of another era, right? Like which is it's so fascinating to see how the roots of where it was at the time.
Yeah, and I think Audi as a brand, I mean, it's the only brand that's ever been able to really leapfrog from, a lower end kind of mass market brand, into the luxury space. So I think, rallying played a huge role in that, right? And I think, plays a pivotal part in the history of Audi being able to jump essentially market segments, which no OEM has ever done to where it is today, right?
As long as I've been around the brand, I hadn't really thought about that. Yeah, that's come to think of it, I'm not really sure I know of. Others have tried, right? But I'm not so sure anybody's really done it successfully other than Audi.
Yeah, and I was going to say, Hannu always talked about a survey I think that they had done before they went rallying in some markets where more people thought that Audi was a washing machine brand than a car brand, and one of the biggest things that they accomplished with rally was like no one made that mistake anymore. Everybody knew that this is a car and it's got insane performance. So it was definitely a huge thing for Audi as a brand, and let them kind of develop and lift the brand into the next level.
That's wild. That's it. You spent time at Audi Canada, you said?
I did, yeah. So, I kind of stuck to the automotive industry. So I was there for a while, worked for another couple of brands, and most recently before eBay, I was at Volkswagen Canada. So, spent some time with the group, and visited Ingolstadt a few times, and it was great to go to Audi Tradition. It was my second time there, and just kind of seeing that history, and also working for the company that Hannu was a part of. I thought was something that drew me to it as well.
Yeah, that's interesting the way it came full circle. So I guess so another question on the Audi front then. In reading your story on Dirtfish, maybe it was you you wrote it, correct?
Yeah, I did, but obviously with Vesa's input, it was all our kind of memories from there.
So you said it was your first time in the Quattro. Was that for you in particular, for both of you, or maybe just in the competition car, or the first time in one of them at all?
Yeah, so actually, it was the first time for me to drive one, for sure. Hannu actually had a S1 E2 that was the car that he had won the kind of rally before Rally Finland. That was kind of the test rally that they did every year. So he owned that car for a few years, and that originally came from David Sutton, who prepared all the Audis for rallying. He was my godfather, actually, and then that car ended up from David to Hannu, and Hannu kept it for a while. And I always remember riding with him in the UK. I got to jump in the car, and he's like, okay, we're just going to go on a couple public roads. I'll show you what this thing can do. And it was just such a crazy experience. And then he ended up selling that car later on, but it was definitely like one of those moments that when I look back now as a kid, like I'll never forget, that experience of jumping in there.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I like through Goodwood and some other events. I remember many years ago, we went to Ingolstadt, and I recall there being some sort of kind of festival where they would drive a lot of the museum cars around the Donau River, which was close by. So I got to jump in a car like way back when with Hannu, and then obviously more recently at Goodwood and stuff. Some originals, some replicas, but that 5-cylinder sound definitely is the sound of Audi for me.
Yeah, it's very unique and so cool. Well, this is amazing. Well, I guess the other thing my other question I had for you in regards to the rally, are they doing it again? I think I saw you guys mention you might be going back next year for the anniversary of your dad's championship. Was that they'll be doing it again next year?
That was more like we had a couple of like Audi folks like as part of the rally, and one of the things we started talking about was like it's the 40-year mark of the championship, and I think it's also the 40-year anniversary of Audi Sport being like an organization. So we started kicking around the idea of like maybe we could come back with the families, you know, and take a look, and even this kind of crazy idea of maybe doing an RS3 like Audi exclusive order, you know, that we could pick up over there. So it's all kind of hush hush right now, and we're trying to figure out what we could do, but it could be really amazing. And I know that 5-cylinder is not going to last in Audi's lineup for much longer, so I feel like now's the time to pick one up, you know, and do something special with it.
This is probably the last of the breed, right? And it's such the new car I hear. So I haven't had a chance to take a spin in one yet, but I hear
me neither.
I hear it's very good.
It's incredible for sure. From everything I read, it's like it's the best one yet, right? So it would be a really cool thing to do.
Yeah, sure. And I think in terms of the rally, I don't think they're going to be able to do that like anytime soon, unless it's like the 75th anniversary, because literally like we started in northern Kiel, you know, close to the Baltic Ocean, and we ended it, you know, in Bavaria and Munich, you know, so literally we went across the country, you know, in 6 or 7 days. So just the sheer, you know, logistical effort is not something that's kind of, you know, very feasible to do every year.
Yeah. Well, perhaps figure something else out that would be.
Yeah, hopefully there are some, you know, maybe some Audi tradition events in the future or something like that we could be a part of. So absolutely, I think it would be great to you know, keep that connection going and have the ability to kind of, you know, keep his memory alive, but then also you know, continue to experience the amazing you know, rally machinery that he drove.
Yeah. Well, I mean, in regards to this, we'll do a story in the magazine, you know, and additionally, if you guys do more events, we'd love to cover. And beyond that, should you ever, you know, we're US and Canada, right, is the way so should you ever find yourselves out wanting to an event, we'd love to include you in anything, but if you're doing events too, let us know. We'd love to send our members to cheer you on and follow along. I mean, it's such a you know, like seeing your dad at Sebring. Similarly, when Tim Maskus dropped me a note that you guys had taken part in it, might be interested in telling your story here, etc. Like it's just a pleasurable reminder that I forget that y'all are here on our side of the pond, and would love to you know, do more with you if that's an opportunity.
Yeah, Tim's such a great guy, and you know, he was part of the Lake Superior you know, trip that Hannu and I had. So he's such a super fan, and the only thing I kicked myself was that he was selling one of his quattros, one of his quattros, and that was right before the crazy price increases that we see now, and I didn't buy it, so that's what I'm kicking myself about.
Pretty much any asset you can say that about right now.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
But yeah, really appreciate that. Thanks for the interest in doing this. It's really fun for us and super cool, and definitely huge fans of the brand and everything you guys are doing too. So we'll for sure keep in touch. And if you're ever in Miami, let me know. Maybe with Audi being an F1, it's going to be a good reason to come over here for some races.
I bet it will. Yeah. All right. So quick, before we wrap this up, I'm curious. With the rallying history and the technology history that also kind of goes along with your dad, what are your thoughts on Dakar? Right, like to me, that's almost the more interesting one, right? Like Formula One's cool. I'm super happy to see Audi going that way, but Dakar is such both a science fair and return to rally at the same time. I'm fascinated by it.
Yeah, it's cool. I mean, from my side, I've never like followed it super close. Like I asked Hannu a few times like why he never actually did the rally, and he was never one to be like, oh, you know, like it's dangerous. But that one, he was like, it's dangerous. He's like, the sand shifts so much. He's like, I'd rather not do that one, you know, because you could have pace notes and you could know what's coming up, and overnight it shifted, you know. So he kind of opted out of doing that. So I definitely respect the guys who go out there and do it. And I think with the technology Audi's like bringing, it's not quite the 4-wheel drive leap, you know, but they're definitely trying to push forward with showing like, hey, this is not just like another team. We're doing something technologically really different. So I think that's super cool. And hopefully they're going to have a lot of success with it. I mean, it looked amazing already from what they were able to put together.
Yeah. And then I think what's cool about the Dakar program and you know, other forms of motorsport, I think kind of having the engineering freedom to really push the envelope fits really well with the brand and Audi specifically. And obviously, the massive push we have to electrification right now. So I kind of like that they're able to, develop that platform a lot, and undoubtedly Formula One will also provide that opportunity. But I think when you kind of have more of a blank canvas or a blank sheet to start, doing something from scratch, I think that's where, it has a nice tie into the past and the history of kind of quattro and that amazing technology that they brought to rallying. So I'm a fan of that. And I mean, if you compare it to Formula E, a few years ago, that to me probably has less of an appeal, for being an Audi fan than something where they can really, push the envelope from an engineering and technology perspective.
Right.
And at least be back on gravel. That's nice.
Yeah, totally. But I think,
and Carlos Sainz rally driver, driving it, that's cool.
Yeah, that's really cool.
Not a bad thing. I find the Audi brand is always best when, like you said, when they can push the technology, right? So like when they're there, whether it's quattro rally, whether it was like later, gosh, the with the R8 LMPs, the way you could change things out and stay on the track so quickly, the transmission changes and everything else, maybe a little less sexy than all-wheel drive, but certainly significant to winning. And then TDI, and then the hybrid, et cetera, and now this, like it's such a it's going into more of a spec series like Formula E. Yeah, it's interesting and whatever, but when they can really push their technology, it's fascinating. So anyway, well, guys, I really appreciate you giving me some time today, and please don't be strangers. We'd love to do more with you and cover you more as ever you may do things. So I thank you so much.
Thanks so much. Love this. This is awesome. Thanks, George.
Yeah, fantastic. Thanks for including us. And this was a lot of fun.